پارلمان ایتالیا 21 تیر 1402 قسمت دوم. سناتور لوچو مالان، رهبر اکثریت در مجلس سنای ایتالیا. برنامه‌ای که خانم رجوی به ما ارائه کرد، ایران آزاد با برابری زن و مرد را نوید می‌دهد و ما تمام تلاش خود را برای حمایت از مبارزه شما به عمل می‌آوریم.
Ringrazio l'onorevole Pozzolo per aver organizzato, per aver contribuito a organizzare questo incontro. Un saluto molto cordiale e molto solidale con la signora Meriem Rejui. Ringrazio per il suo messaggio, come sempre molto chiaro, con grande coerenza rispetto a tutte le volte che l'abbiamo ascoltata in passato. Saluto anche l'onorevole Berkó, la senatrice Izabella Natouralle e tutti i presenti qui. Siete davvero tanti, come sempre la signora Rejui raccoglie molte persone, ne abbiamo viste molte, ma molte di più, ma non in questa. Il messaggio è molto chiaro. Sempre di più ci si rende conto che l'attuale regime di Teheran è pericoloso per la sicurezza internazionale, è di grandissimo danno alla società iraniana, è un popolo straordinario con una storia e une potenzialità grandissime, che purtroppo vengono mortificate da questo regime che frena tutte le qualità e le possibilità e le potenzialità del popolo iraniano. Il piano che ci ha presentato la signora Rejui è quello di sempre, e cioè un Iran libero, con l'eguaglianza fra uomini e donne, non più oppositori politici messi in carcere, torturati e uccisi, come vediamo da troppo tempo, non più pericolo per il panorama internazionale, ma ci ha parlato di un Iran denuclearizzato, e questo sarebbe già solo questa una buona ragione per cui tutti i paesi, non soltanto, tutti gli stati dovrebbero sostenere un programma che vada in questo senso. Sappiamo che la maggior parte dei senatori, la maggior parte dei deputati hanno firmato questo appello anche in questa legislatura, e noi faremo tutto quanto è nelle nostre possibilità per sostenere la vostra lotta, sostenere le vostre richieste, le vostre istanze, sapendo che è interesse del popolo iraniano, è interesse della sicurezza internazionale, e dunque è interesse anche dell'Italia e degli italiani, perché un mondo più sicuro, con una grande nazione come l'Iran, che possa tornare a dare un contributo positivo alla sicurezza, al progresso internazionale, è un patrimonio per tutti, per il mondo, per l'Iran e per l'Italia. Grazie.
برکو، رئیس و سخنگوی پارلمان انگلستان 2009 تا 2019. این افتخار و امتیاز برای من است که در این لحظه خاص در کنار یکی از شجاع‌ترین، اصولی‌ترین و ژرف‌بین‌ترین زنان جهان، خانم مریم رجوی بنشینم.
این ترفند قدیمی دیکتاتوری هاست که برای اخفال دشمنانشان با مطرح کردن امکان تغییر از درون نظام وانمود می کنند رقابتی از نوع سیستم پارلمانی وجود دارد.
چه اعتراف وحشتناکی به ضعف و فریب از سوی رژیمی که میگوید هیچ آلترناتیوی وجود ندارد. آنها نمی توانند از سابقه اقتصادی و حقوق بشری و از سابقه خود به عنوان تروریست، شکنجهگر، آدمربا، گروگانگیر و حامل سلاح‌های اتمی در آینده دفاع کنند، میگویند هیچ جایگزینی وجود ندارد.
شورای ملی مقاومت ایران تکذیب زنده این تز است که جایگزینی وجود ندارد، در حالی که یک آلترناتیو وجود دارد، یک آلترناتیو دموکراتیک، یک آلترناتیو به خوبی سازماندهی شده، آلترناتیوی که در محتوا منسجم است و بر اصولی پایه‌گذاری شده و متعهد به یک برنامه مشخص است.
آلترناتیو وجود دارد و خانم رجوی هر سال این جایگزین را در قالب برنامه 10 ماده‌ای بیان کرده است.
رویداد پاریس گواهی باشکوهی بود بر حمایتی که در سراسر اروپا و آمریکای شمالی از مقاومت ایران وجود دارد. 50 نفر در یک اجلاس یک روز کامل در ادای احترام به خانم رجوی و شورای ملی مقاومت سخنرانی کردند و گفتند نباید پشتیبان یک دیکتاتوری باشیم.
زمان آن فرا رسیده که نیروهای تغییر، دموکراسی، حاکمیت قانون و عدالت در ایران به نمایندگی شورای ملی مقاومت و تجسم بسیار مشخص آن در رهبری خانم رجوی فرصت را مغتنم بشمارند.
Chairman, sir, let me thank you warmly, profusely, and from the heart for those kind words. And let me begin by saying, I think not only on my own behalf and that of senatorial or parliamentary colleagues, but for everybody here present, it is an honor and a privilege to stand, or at this particular moment in time to sit, if you will, shoulder to shoulder with one of the bravest, most principled, and most visionary women in the world, and I refer to Madame Rajvi. Friends and colleagues, there is a pervasive myth which is fast becoming a kind of chronic hallucination in the Western world, that there is something that can be described as a reformist or reforming or reform-minded faction struggling earnestly and with growing success for supremacy within the Iranian dictatorship. Brits are often accused, my friends, of reserve, of understatement, of not wishing to be too blunt. Well, I'm going to break that mold, Madame Rajvi, Mr. Chairman, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, because that pervasive myth, which has become that chronic hallucination, is not innocent, it is not harmless, it is extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous, both because it is wrong, indeed it is almost a contradiction in terms to think of a reform-minded, rebellious faction within the context of a dictatorship. So it is wrong. To put it really bluntly, I would say it is nonsense on stilts, and it is dangerous because it absolutely falls hook, line, and sinker, as we say in the United Kingdom, into the trap that has been created for us by the Iranian government itself. It is an old stratagem of dictatorships to seek to hoodwink their enemies by implying the possibility of change. A genuine contestation of a kind that you would expect within a parliamentary and cabinet-orientated system to achieve influence. And for so long as the regime has, in the West, people who are Democrats, but who say, oh, We've got to support the reformers within the regime. We mustn't upset the apple cart. We mustn't be too outspoken. We mustn't threaten to rip asunder the regime. We've got to support the reformers. That suits the torturers and tyrants of Tehran because it reduces almost to negligible proportions the pressure upon the regime. So it needs to be said that it is wrong and that it is dangerous. But for so long as that chronic hallucination persists, it results in effective political paralysis in terms of the goal of all of us in this hall, which is to deliver a free Iran. Because if people think that there is a chance of change from within, even though I have witnessed no evidence whatever, not a scintilla, not a morsel, not the slightest hint of a possibility of meaningful reform in the 40 years since I became politically conscious of the situation in Iran, so long as that notion persists, ladies and gentlemen, do you understand me when I say that it immediately segues into the argument for appeasement? Because if you think there's a chance of change, a little push here, a little shove there, another speech somewhere else, and an attempt through some sort of diplomatic engagement or protocol to bring about change, that is the very essence, the meaning, the temper, the mood, the mindset of appeasement. And appeasement fails everywhere. And I hope you will forgive me, my friends, with no disrespect to the generations of magnificent Italian parliamentarians and freedom fighters, if I call upon the late and great Sir Winston Churchill to make my point. When Churchill was fighting with words and his pen to bring about a change of attitude within the British government in the 1930s, a British government predominantly comprised of his own party, Churchill said of Stanley Baldwin, everybody remembers Neville Chamberlain and his ridiculous piece of paper. Not so many represent Baldwin for the bad guy that he was, but Baldwin was a bad man on appeasement. And Baldwin, as Prime Minister, practiced appeasement. And it was Churchill who said to him, bluntly, so I'm following in good footsteps, my friends, there sits my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, on the Treasury bench, the government front bench, up against Adolf Hitler. And what is his attitude? I say to the House, said Churchill, he is resolved only to be irresolute, adamant for drift, solid for fluidity, all-powerful to be impotent. In other words, absolutely useless. And as Churchill eventually said, rather amusingly, perhaps a bit brutally and unkindly, but rather amusingly, I have nothing personal against Stanley Baldwin. It is just that upon the whole, I think it would have been better for the world if he had never been born. The same about the tyrants and torturers of Tehran. The truth of the matter is, appeasement fails. The only thing that dictators respect is strength. So we must not allow them to foster an atmosphere of appeasement which is accompanied by what I call Tina. Now, who's Tina? Well, Tina is a female name, but Tina also stands for there is no alternative. There is no alternative but a set of arrangements that will lead to chaos. And that too we know is wrong. And you do not have, my friends, to look into the crystal ball when you can read the book. And we can read the book of the last 40 plus years. The National Council of Resistance of Iran is the living refutation of the thesis that there is no alternative. There is an alternative. It is a democratic alternative. It is a well-organized alternative. It is a conceptually coherent alternative. And it is an alternative grounded in principle and committed to an explicit program, if you will, Madame Rajavi's intended contract with the people of Iran. So let's not have any more of this substandard, down-market, low-grade drivel about there being no alternative. What an appalling admission of weakness, of error, of failure, of deceit on the part of the regime that it says there's no alternative. They can't defend their own record. They can't defend their economic record. They can't defend their human rights record. They can't defend their record as terrorists, as torturers, as kidnappers, as hostage takers, as would-be nuclear armors, as people who wish to oppress their own people and, if possible, others as well. So they're left saying there is no alternative. There is an alternative, and Madame Rajavi has articulated that alternative year after year after year in the form of the 10-point plan, which is about human rights, equality between men and women, a differentiation and separation between religion and politics, a passion for protecting the environment, and a recognition that a democracy means giving people the chance to choose who governs them, and yes, the chance every so often to change that choice. And my friends, I just want to round off by saying this. You will notice in the dishonest lexicon, the dishonest use of the dictionary by the Iranian regime, how they say that there is no united opposition, no united opposition. They've stopped saying there's no meaningful alternative. They say there's no united opposition alternative. Well, the answer to that is that there is a united alternative with growing and mass support amongst the people of Iran who believe in democracy, who believe in pluralism, who believe in parliamentarism, who believe in choice, who believe in equality, who believe in justice, who believe in the rule of law. If what the butchers, the tyrants, the demagogues from Iran's government are saying is that there isn't unanimity, well, of course there is not unanimity. My friends, there is unanimity, that is to say, one view only, to be found only in heaven or in hell. Of course there is not unanimity, and Mrs. Rajavi and her mass movement cannot be expected to unite with the enemies of democracy, with people who don't favor pluralism, people who don't want democratic change, who don't believe in equality, who don't think that should be a right to regular and independently monitored elections, but amongst the mass of people for whom the flame of freedom will never be extinguished and for whom that flame burns brightly, there is mass support for change. And everything I've heard, and I've listened to Mrs. Rajavi many times, from her and her colleagues tells me that they aren't looking for outsiders to change Iran. The event in Paris was a magnificent testament to the support across Europe and North America that exists. 50 people speaking 11 days ago in an all-day conference in tribute to Mrs. Rajvi and the National Council. And what those people were saying, including me, is what we shouldn't do is get in the way. We shouldn't be an obstacle. We shouldn't be propping up a dictatorship. But the vehicle of change that Mrs. Rajvi advocates, and which is dear to her heart, is a domestic vehicle of change, homegrown, from Iranian soil, the people of Iran determining their own future. And the reason why I speak so enthusiastically in support of change in Iran is that for all the faults and foibles and failings of my own country's democracy, it is nevertheless a democracy. And I'm passionate about and proud of that fact, as Italian statesmen, human rights activists, civil society representatives will similarly be proud of their democracy in Italy. And we do not have the right to look the other way, to fly home and to forget about Iran's plight. It is time that the forces of change, of democracy, of the rule of law, of justice in Iran, represented by the National Council and embodied very personally in the leadership of Mrs. Rajvi, had their opportunity. They should enjoy the freedom, the peace, the justice, the rule of law that we have so long enjoyed and they have too long been denied. Let it begin here and spread out across the nations until there is a deafening cry for change and the tyrants of Tehran are relegated to the dustbin of history where they belong. Thank you.